The room had been prepared for a routine royal briefing. Instead, King Charles entered carrying a sealed declaration that would alter the balance of power inside the monarchy. He did not sit. He did not invite questions. With William standing silently beside him and senior courtiers watching in disbelief, the monarch announced that Catherine would assume the unprecedented position of Queen Regent of Britain, effective immediately under emergency royal authority. Then he placed his pen on the table, and the room went completely still. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had summoned Prince William, Catherine, Queen Camilla, Princess Anne, and a handful of advisors to Buckingham Palace without warning. Guards collected every phone. Secretary locked the doors. No one was told why the meeting had been called. The Queen Regent of Britain, as the declaration explained, would represent the sovereign, direct urgent royal business, coordinate working royals, and act in his name whenever he could not perform essential duties. Catherine did not smile. The Princess of Wales gripped her chair and searched William's face, shaken by a burden that could pull her from her children and place every decision under national judgment. He answered with one restrained nod. The future king looked proud, but also prepared, revealing that he had known more before Charles entered. Camilla remained frozen. Queen Camilla watched an aide place the official briefing folder before Catherine, rather than her. The Queen Consort's expression tightened, because that movement confirmed the title was not decorative. It carried power, access, and the trust she had expected as the king's wife. Charles had prepared everything in secret. The declaration carried several signatures and the royal seal. The formal mark proving a document had sovereign approval. Even trusted advisors had been excluded from the final stage. The monarch had rejected softer titles, such as royal deputy. He wanted no confusion. William remained first in the line of succession, but Catherine would hold immediate emergency authority. A courtier finally asked whether the announcement should wait until the palace had prepared the public. Charles turned toward Catherine without answering. She drew one breath, released the chair, and ordered the declaration announced that evening. Her first command came before the ink had dried. Camilla stayed seated when the meeting ended. Catherine followed the king into his private office, and the closing door told the queen consort something no explanation could soften. This decision had begun long before that morning. But to understand why Charles had chosen her, everyone had to face what each person in that room stood to lose. The declaration did not simply create a new royal position. It drove a blade through 4 deeply personal relationships. For Charles, it was an admission that the crown could no longer depend on him alone. For Catherine, it was a duty she had never publicly sought. For William, it raised uncomfortable questions about his own future. And for Camilla, it delivered the most painful message of all. When the monarchy faced its greatest test, the king had chosen another woman to carry its authority. Charles had spent months forcing himself through meetings, ceremonies, and private briefings, while hiding moments of exhaustion from much of the household. The crown, the institution represented by the sovereign, and carried through generations, could not be allowed to appear uncertain whenever the monarch needed rest. He understood that one public collapse or cancelled duty without explanation could trigger panic, weaken confidence, and turn private vulnerability into a national crisis. Catherine had earned his trust without openly pursuing influence. She remained calm during family disagreements, followed royal discipline, and rarely allowed personal emotion to disturb public duty. The new regent had become the king's safest choice, because she could preserve continuity without making the transfer look like a battle for control. Yet her success carried suffering. Every quality that made her suitable also threatened to pull her further away from the quiet family life she had fought to protect. William found her alone in a palace corridor after the meeting. Prince William felt fierce pride, but the appointment also touched the future he had prepared for since childhood. He asked whether she understood how much privacy the role would consume. Catherine admitted that her first thought had been George, Charlotte, and Louis. The princess feared harsher judgment, longer absences, and expectations that might eventually fall upon their children. Her husband reached for her hand, but neither pretended the burden would remain inside palace walls. Anne approached before they could continue. Princess Anne lowered her voice and warned Catherine, "Do not mistake their silence for disapproval." The king's sister explained that some officials were already waiting to test whether the new authority was real. She offered support, but her warning carried a darker truth. The regent would face resistance before she had time to understand the position she had accepted. Camilla had expected emergency authority to pass through her own office. Queen Camilla had already discussed expanded responsibilities with selected aides, believing the king's wife would naturally stand closest to the center of power. She found Charles beside a closed drawing room door and asked whether he had ever considered naming her. The monarch offered no comfort. He said the decision had been made for the survival of the crown, not the protection of anyone's feelings. Camilla stood motionless as he walked away. The queen consort no longer wanted an explanation of the declaration. She wanted to know the exact moment the king had stopped trusting her with the monarchy's future. The appointment appeared sudden outside the palace, but its true origin lay in one hidden emergency. When Catherine acted, she hesitated, and Charles saw something he could never forget. Weeks before the declaration, a private ceremony at Windsor Castle descended into a crisis that never reached the public. Charles suddenly became disoriented moments before addressing senior military representatives, while conflicting instructions spread through the household. Camilla demanded that the event be postponed. William was still traveling back to the estate. Then Catherine stepped forward, closed the briefing folder, reorganized the room, and made one decision that prevented panic. From that night onward, Charles no longer wondered who could hold the monarchy together. The gathering had been arranged for senior military officers, charity leaders, and Commonwealth representatives. The Commonwealth is a voluntary association of nations linked by shared history and cooperation, making any royal failure before its delegates politically sensitive. Because the ceremony was private, the palace had no public explanation ready. One sudden cancellation could have exposed confusion at the center of the monarchy. Charles lost his place minutes before speaking. The king stared at the revised order of events, failed to recognize a change he had approved earlier, and asked for William. The future king was still returning to Windsor. That single question frightened everyone nearby because it revealed how quickly routine had turned into vulnerability. Camilla reacted first. Queen Camilla insisted that the doors remain closed and the guests be dismissed. Her fear for her husband was real, but sending dozens of dignitaries away without explanation would have created whispers before they reached their cars. The queen consort wanted to protect him, yet her instinct risked making the crisis impossible to hide. Catherine understood the danger immediately. The Princess of Wales knew that acting without formal authority could look like ambition, especially with William absent. Still, she closed the briefing folder and told the senior equerry, the official who organizes royal duties and movement, that the ceremony would continue in a shorter form. She accepted responsibility before anyone else was willing to do so. Catherine then entered Charles's private room alone. She found the monarch beside an untouched glass of water, silent and humiliated. The princess knelt beside him, explained exactly how the next minutes would unfold, and promised that no guest would see him struggle. He looked at her for several seconds before finally nodding. Catherine greeted the waiting attendees, turned the formal presentation into a controlled private reception, and bought the king enough time to recover. Charles eventually entered, completed the shortened ceremony, and left without a single guest understanding how close the evening had come to collapse. Charles returned to the original briefing document after the final visitor departed. The emergency chain of command meant the order of people expected to act if the sovereign could not continue. He drew a line through the existing names and wrote Catherine at the top. Anne saw the change, watched her brother close the folder, and chose silence. Camilla later discovered that the paper had vanished from the royal archive. The queen consort became convinced Catherine had used the emergency to gain influence. The hidden Windsor incident had given Charles his answer, but it had also planted a wound inside Camilla, and when that wound opened, royal restraint gave way to direct confrontation. The confrontation happened behind a locked door, with no advisors present. Camilla entered carrying a copy of the emergency declaration and found Catherine standing beside the king's desk. She did not offer congratulations. She placed the document between them and accused the younger royal of accepting a position designed to diminish her. Catherine remained composed until the queen consort declared, "You have taken my place." What followed was not a constitutional debate. It was a reckoning between two women whose futures had become impossible to separate. Camilla had refused every offer to speak through the king's secretary. She wanted Catherine alone, without courtiers softening the words or carrying them elsewhere. The regency temporary authority to act for the sovereign during an emergency had changed more than palace duties. It had placed one woman at the center of royal power, and left the other wondering whether her marriage still carried institutional trust. Catherine accepted the meeting because retreat would look like weakness. The princess listened as Camilla argued that the king's wife should naturally support and represent him. She answered that Charles had created an operational role, not issued a judgment on anyone's marriage. The explanation was calm, but it did nothing to ease the humiliation burning across the room. Camilla finally revealed the fear beneath her anger. The queen consort said the monarchy had always tolerated her rather than fully embraced her. Catherine's appointment now seemed to prove that she would never be trusted with the institution Charles had spent his life defending. She had stood beside him through public hostility, yet when the crown shook, another woman had been chosen. Catherine's restraint broke. She refused to apologize for the Windsor emergency or for preventing a private crisis from becoming public chaos. The future queen reminded Camilla that duty could not wait until every wounded feeling had been protected. Her voice stayed low, but the words landed hard. Camilla then placed a handwritten copy of the altered emergency chain of command on the desk. The document listed the order of people expected to act when the monarch could not continue. She demanded to know whether Catherine had encouraged Charles to remove her name after Windsor. Catherine stared at the paper and revealed through that private conversation that she had known nothing about the final plan. William had been aware that emergency arrangements were under review, but even he had not been told the title Charles intended to use. The princess had learned she would become Queen Regent only hours before the declaration. Charles entered as Camilla raised her voice again. The king lifted the copied document from the desk and told his wife that Catherine had taken nothing from her. He had made the decision because the monarchy needed someone who could act without hesitation. Camilla left without answering. Yet Charles's defense created a deeper danger. If Catherine's authority came entirely from him, then whoever controlled access to the king could still control the regency itself. The confrontation settled who he trusted, but a quieter struggle was beginning over signatures, access, and the machinery of royal power. Catherine had been given the title, but titles inside a monarchy mean little unless the institution obeys them. Within hours, private secretaries, legal advisors, household commanders, and senior royals began deciding how far her authority would truly reach. Every diary entry, security briefing, and sealed instruction became part of a hidden contest. At the center stood William, watching officials debate his wife's power as though she were not in the building. Then he closed the folder in front of them and made his position unmistakably clear. Palace advisors moved quickly to draft a temporary framework, allowing Catherine to approve urgent engagements, receive protected briefings, coordinate royal responses, and issue instructions in Charles's name. The framework was a written set of rules defining what the regent could and could not do. It did not change the line of succession, make her sovereign, or reduce William's future role. yet its wording still placed more immediate operational power in her hands than any other royal except the king. William listened as senior officials described Catherine as a risk that needed to be managed. The prince remained silent, while one advisor argued that every major decision should be reviewed by a separate committee. Then he shut the folder and said Charles had not appointed his wife to become a decorative messenger. The future king warned that weakening her authority would mean challenging the sovereign's decision and challenging him as well. Catherine soon discovered the resistance was not limited to one meeting. Instructions concerning the king's engagements were still being issued through Camilla's private office. The queen consort's staff continued to alter times, approve visitors, and answer requests as though the emergency declaration had changed nothing. Two chains of command now existed. One mistake could send Charles to conflicting events, expose his condition, or make the regency look powerless. Anne understood the danger before anyone else admitted it. Princess Anne controlled the cooperation of several senior working royals and much of the practical rhythm behind major engagements. She told Catherine that written authority might open doors, but obedience would depend on whether the family believed she was prepared to use it. The king's sister offered her support, yet she made clear that hesitation would invite rebellion. The first test arrived that afternoon. Charles had been scheduled for a large public appearance through one office, while another had reserved the same period for private recovery. Catherine studied both instructions, knowing either choice would create enemies. The regent cancelled the public engagement and signed the order herself. She protected the king, but she also gave her critics exactly what they needed to accuse her of hiding him. The decision should have remained confidential. Instead, a copy of the revised schedule reached the press before the palace could prepare an explanation. Suspicion turned inward at once. Catherine's first command had been meant to protect Charles, but once the document escaped, the emergency regency stopped being a family secret and became a public crisis. By sunrise, the confidential schedule was no longer confidential. Broadcasters questioned whether the king was capable of continuing. Newspapers demanded to know why Catherine had cancelled his appearance, and palace telephones began ringing before the household had prepared a single answer. The regent's first protective decision was transformed into evidence of instability. While William searched for the source of the leak, Camilla sat alone with the morning paper folded beside her and realized that nearly everyone inside the palace suspected her. Catherine read the headlines in silence. The leaked schedule showed that she had personally removed Charles from a major engagement, but it did not include the recovery period ordered for him. Without that missing context, the decision looked sudden and controlling. The regency, the temporary authority to act for the sovereign during an emergency, now appeared less like protection and more like a hidden takeover. William moved through the palace demanding access records. The prince ordered aides separated for questioning, and private offices instructed to surrender every draft schedule. Digital timestamps became measures of loyalty. One wrong entry could destroy a career, and ordinary conversations died the moment senior officials entered a room. Catherine found her husband between briefings and asked whether signing the cancellation had been a mistake. The princess had wanted to shield Charles, yet her first command had exposed him to exactly the scrutiny she feared. William told her she had protected his father. Still, the future king could not promise that the public would understand before the damage deepened. Camilla entered her sitting room expecting her secretary and found an empty chair. Queen Camilla learned that her staff had been temporarily reassigned during the inquiry. She folded the newspaper slowly, feeling suspicion strip away even the comfort of familiar faces. The queen consort had challenged Catherine openly, and now every person inside the household seemed ready to believe she had struck back in secret. The evidence soon divided the investigation. Security records showed that the leaked document had passed through Camilla's office, but one of William's junior aides had also accessed it shortly before publication. The trail touched both sides of the family, almost as though someone wanted each camp to accuse the other. Investigators then discovered the cruelest detail. Someone had deliberately removed Charles's recovery notes before releasing the schedule. The leak had been designed to make Catherine appear ruthless, Camilla appear disloyal, and the monarchy tear itself apart from within. Catherine faced the choice during an emergency briefing. A senior official urged her to issue a statement distancing the regency from Camilla's office. The princess lifted the proposed words from the table and refused. No member of the family, she said, would be condemned without proof. Camilla heard of that decision through a documented account from her private secretary. The queen consort's anger shifted into doubt. That evening, she requested a private meeting with Catherine, not to challenge her title, but to name the person who had encouraged resistance from the beginning. For the first time, she approached the regent not as a rival, but as the only woman who might understand how both of them had been manipulated. There were no secretaries, no legal advisors, and no husbands in the room. Catherine closed the door herself and sat opposite Camilla as the queen consort placed a small notebook between them. Inside were dates, initials, and records of conversations held before the declaration. Camilla admitted that she had been encouraged to believe Catherine was pushing for power. Catherine revealed she had been warned that Camilla intended to obstruct the regency. In that silence, both women finally recognized the same truth. Someone had needed them to become enemies. Camilla opened the notebook and traced the entries with one finger. The record contained meetings with a senior household advisor who had repeatedly suggested that Catherine influenced Charles during the Windsor emergency and planned to reduce the queen consort's public role. A household advisor is a senior official who helps organize royal decisions, schedules, and access, which meant his warnings had carried the weight of trusted palace knowledge. Catherine listened without interrupting. The princess then produced her own documented notes from private briefings held before the declaration. She had been told that Camilla was gathering senior courtiers to resist the regency and weaken every order issued in the king's name. The wording was almost identical, the same phrases, the same warnings, the same carefully planted fear. Camilla finally admitted why the deception had worked. The queen consort confessed that she had always feared the public would prefer Catherine, and that Charles might one day trust the younger woman's judgment more than hers. The manipulation had not created that wound. It had simply pressed against one that already existed. Catherine answered with equal honesty. The regent admitted that the title had made her feel less powerful, not more powerful, because every choice now threatened someone she loved. She had begun treating disagreement as betrayal, and every silence as resistance. The princess told Camilla that carrying authority had not made her feel secure. It had made her afraid of failing the entire family. The evidence led to one man, the deputy private secretary, the official responsible for circulating emergency schedules and coordinating senior instructions, had created competing orders and leaked the altered document. He had expected the chaos to force Charles to cancel the declaration. Camilla understood the motive first. The advisor had not truly supported her or hated Catherine. He believed an informal committee of officials should control any royal emergency, and one powerful regent would be far harder to manage. Camilla pushed the notebook across the table. The queen consort told Catherine to use it. When the princess warned that doing so might expose her private anger, she replied that protecting her pride had already caused enough damage. The alliance ended the battle inside the palace, but it created a greater test beyond its gates. Catherine now had the evidence, the authority, and Camilla's support. What she did not yet have was the country's trust, and she could no longer lead from behind a closed door. By dawn, crowds had begun gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Some carried Union flags, others held newspapers bearing Catherine's portrait beneath a single enormous headline, "The King's Choice." Television presenters spoke of constitutional shock, family sacrifice, and an uncertain royal future. Then the palace gates opened, and Catherine appeared beside William, Charles, and Camilla. The image instantly changed the story. This was no longer a woman seizing influence. It was a family standing together after surviving an attempt to divide it. The palace released the full framework before the appearance. The document explained that Catherine's authority was temporary, limited, and activated only when Charles required support. The line of succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the throne, remained unchanged, and William was still the heir. That detail mattered, because it stopped the declaration from looking like an attempt to bypass the future king or create a rival center of power. Officials also confirmed that the deputy private secretary had been removed after admitting through a documented internal statement that he manipulated schedules and communications. The palace avoided every sensational detail, but it acknowledged that unauthorized actions had caused confusion and deepened distrust. The admission gave the public one clear truth. The royal family had not simply fractured on its own. Someone inside the system had tried to force it apart. Catherine heard the crowd before she saw it. The princess stood behind the balcony doors and asked William whether silence might still be safer. The prince answered that people could not trust a role they had never seen its holder accept. He reminded her that fear would be interpreted as guilt, while presence could finally turn suspicion into understanding. Charles stepped closer and adjusted Catherine's ceremonial insignia with unsteady hands. The insignia was a formal badge, showing that she now carried authority in the sovereign's name. The king admitted that the burden should never have reached her so soon. She answered that duty did not arrive according to anyone's preferred timing. He looked at her with pride, but also with the pain of knowing his weakness had changed her life. Camilla remained the final uncertainty. Commentators expected the queen consort to stay away, and her absence would have confirmed a permanent fracture. Instead, she joined the family at the last moment and deliberately allowed Catherine to stand closest to Charles. The gesture said what no palace statement could. She accepted the new order. A young girl outside raised a handmade sign reading, "Catherine, stay strong." The crowd began applauding as the princess placed one hand over her heart. That single response became the defining public moment carried across broadcasts. Britain had accepted the king's declaration, but applause could not define the regency forever. The final verdict would come inside the palace, when Catherine decided what kind of power she was willing to hold and what limits she would place upon herself. That evening, Catherine returned to the same room where Charles had first named her Queen Regent. The cheering had faded, the advisors had gone, and the declaration remained on the table beneath the royal seal. She could have treated the moment as a victory. Instead, she removed the ceremonial insignia, placed it beside the document, and asked the king to promise that the role would never become a weapon against his family. Charles agreed. In that quiet exchange, the true meaning of the regency was finally revealed. The crisis had been contained. The leak had been traced. The rival chains of command had been closed, and Catherine's emergency authority was now recognized across the royal household. The royal seal, the formal mark showing that a document carries the sovereign's approval, no longer represented fear or confusion. It represented a clear structure that could protect the monarchy when pressure threatened to overwhelm it. Charles remained sovereign. The king would continue his constitutional role while reducing selected demands, and Catherine would support rather than replace him. Her presence meant one difficult day would no longer become a national emergency. His vulnerability could be managed with dignity instead of hidden, until it became impossible to control. William found Catherine before the final document was signed. Prince William admitted that he had feared the title would create distance between them and blur the future he had prepared for all his life. He now understood that she had accepted the burden for the same reason he stood beside his father, to protect the family without surrendering the crown's future. Camilla arrived soon afterward. The queen consort thanked Catherine for refusing to accuse her during the leak inquiry. Their relationship did not suddenly become easy, and neither woman pretended the pain had vanished. Yet rivalry gave way to respect. For the first time, both understood that their roles could exist without one destroying the other. Catherine then asked for written safeguards requiring consultation with Charles, William, and Anne on decisions affecting the monarchy's long-term direction. Safeguards were formal limits designed to prevent one person from using emergency authority without accountability. Her first true use of expanded power was not to increase it, it was to restrain it. Charles explained his final reason through that private recorded conversation. He had chosen Catherine not because she wanted authority, but because she had repeatedly carried it without treating it as personal ownership. The declaration was never an act of surrender. It was an act of trust. The king signed the final framework and handed her the pen. Catherine added her name, closed the folder, and returned it to him instead of keeping it. The gesture said everything. She served the crown. She did not possess it. Naming Catherine Queen Regent of Britain did not remove Charles, bypass William, or erase Camilla. It transformed a frightened family into a functioning royal partnership. The emergency declaration began as an admission of weakness, but it ended as something stronger. The king secured the crown's future by trusting Catherine, and she justified that trust by choosing service over triumph. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.